On October 28, 1827, in Crawford County, Illinois, a woman named Lucinda Parker gave birth to a baby girl she named Cynthia Anne. Had she stayed in Illinois, Cynthia might have led an unremarkable life, but at around 9 or 10 years old, her parents made a monumental decision. They decided to follow their extended family into the heart of Mexican-ruled Texas to a place now known as Limestone County. There, the Parker family constructed a heavily fortified compound consisting of several blockhouses surrounding a central defensive citadel. It was named Fort Parker, and within a few weeks, the entire Parker clan was joined by other Anglo-American settlers dreaming of peace, piety, and prosperity. By the spring of 1836, the Parkers had tilled half a dozen plots of land and were busy preparing to farm it. The work was endless, the heat oppressive, and the land near barren, but for a time, the Parkers were happy, healthy, and free. This changed when a man collecting firewood began to feel like he was being watched. Over the following weeks, more family members complained of a similar feeling, as if the nearby woods were haunted by unseen apparitions. In response, Fort Parker's security was doubled, with at least 2 men watching the walls at all times. Finally, at dawn on May 19, 1836, one of the watchmen raised the alarm. His terror was heard by everyone in Fort Parker, and the armed settlers scrambled to man the fort's crude battlements. They immediately understood his fears. A huge war party of Comanche and Kiowa warriors was galloping across the plains towards the fort. However, just before entering the settlers' musket range, the party halted and began waving a large white flag. The settlers held their fire, hoping the warriors had come to talk or trade, but John Parker knew otherwise. The Comanche and their Kiowa allies had quickly figured out that waving a white flag had a magical effect on the Anglo-American settlers, often making them let down their guard. Silas, Cynthia's father, proposed that the settlers strike first, claiming that 5 good men could defend the fort if properly supplied and positioned. His brother Benjamin disagreed, knowing how skilled the Comanche were at scaling enemy fortifications. He argued that the defenders would last just minutes before being overrun. According to Benjamin, their best hope was to play dumb, attempt to negotiate, and buy the women and children enough time to escape. When the assault finally came, Benjamin volunteered to be the doomed emissary. As the Parkers watched Benjamin walk out of the fort unarmed towards the mounted Comanche, they knew it was the last time they'd see him alive. Honoring his last request, they gathered a few essentials and prepared to flee into the nearby woods. Silas took charge of the defenders, instructing them to open fire as soon as Benjamin was killed. They fought fiercely, killing a handful of Comanche, but they were overwhelmed. Their final stand bought their families a few minutes, but for some it wasn't enough. Samuel Frost and his young son were cornered and killed by the Comanche. John Parker's wife was nearly out of the fort when she saw her husband being tortured by 3 warriors. Overwhelmed by the sight, she collapsed and was captured. Cynthia's mother and her 2 youngest siblings slipped away with the help of an armed teenage boy, but Cynthia was not so lucky. She was quickly surrounded, picked up, and thrown onto one of the horses. After looting and burning the fort, the warriors departed. Despite the unfortunate circumstances of Cynthia's capture, her age meant she fared better than most Comanche prisoners. While grown men were invariably tortured, killed, and scalped, older women were violated and then executed, and babies and small children were also killed. However, children between the ages of 9 to 13 were often integrated into the tribe, first as slave labor, but eventually as full-fledged members if they proved themselves worthy. Cynthia, around 9 or 10 years old at the time, was chosen for this purpose. Although her life among her family's killers was initially traumatic, her resilience soon marked her out as having great potential. Cynthia's first few months as a Comanche prisoner were extremely rough. She was likely treated with extreme contempt by the other females of the tribe and used as a source of menial slave labor. However, after learning the Comanche language and standing up for herself, she gained their respect. She was taught to tan buffalo hides, a gruesome process, but she learned quickly and soon rivaled the most experienced tanners. Depending on the source, she was given the name Narua, meaning that which has been found. Within a few years, Cynthia Anne had gained significant responsibility within the tribe, participating in all aspects of Comanche womanhood, except for one. Around the age of 13 or 14, Cynthia was introduced to a warrior named Peter Nokona. The pair became close friends, and after Peter was promoted to war chief, he proposed to her. Although it was traditional for chieftains to have several wives, Peter refrained from taking another wife. The couple was deeply in love and very happy together, having 3 children, a boy named Quanah, a daughter named Prairie Flower, and another son. Cynthia's knowledge of her family was limited, and she was a loving Comanche mother to her children. However, several members of the Parker family had miraculously survived the massacre at Fort Parker and never gave up searching for their missing relatives. In December 1860, more than 26 years after the raid, a group of Texas Rangers tracked a band of Comanche warriors to their camp, rumored to hold Anglo-American captives. At dawn on December 18th, Ranger Captain Saul Ross sent a detachment to position themselves behind a chain of sandhills overlooking the camp to cut off any escape routes. The remaining Rangers then attacked the unsuspecting Comanche in unison. The result was devastating. Most of the war band was killed or captured. One Texas Ranger found himself face to face with a terrified Comanche woman holding a baby. He aimed his revolver at her but hesitated when he noticed her pale blue eyes and sandy brown hair. He asked her in clear English who she was, and she replied, "Me, Cynthia Anne." By 1860, the story of the massacre at Fort Parker had gained international infamy, and Cynthia Anne was a household name in Texas. The ranger who found her must have immediately recognized her, marking one of the most momentous recoveries in ranger history. Captain Ross rushed Cynthia back to nearby Fort Belknap and summoned her uncle Isaac to deliver the good news. At first, Isaac didn't recognize her, but the family resemblance slowly became evident, and he was stunned to realize she was his long-lost niece. Cynthia's world had fallen apart again. She wasn't thrilled to return to civilization, but acknowledged Isaac as a relative and agreed to go to his home in Weatherford. Shortly afterward, the state of Texas granted her 5,000 acres of land and an annual pension of $100 for the next 5 years, appointing Isaac as her legal guardian. Despite her efforts to reintegrate into Anglo-American society, the culture shift proved too difficult for Cynthia to adjust to a second time. Her uncle Isaac would sometimes catch her performing intricate rituals involving fire and tobacco smoke. When asked about their purpose, she told him in broken English that they were prayers for the husband and children she had lost and for her own happiness. A man fluent in Comanche visited Cynthia, hoping to learn more about her time with the tribe. Initially, she was wary, but when he spoke to her in Comanche, she was overjoyed. For Cynthia Anne, her time with the linguist was perhaps the happiest in recent memory. She shared much with him, enjoying the ability to communicate properly. Tragically, Cynthia's daughter Prairie Flower succumbed to influenza in 1864. The grief drove Cynthia to engage in grisly Comanche grief rituals, including slashing her breast and inhaling smoke from blood-soaked tobacco. Eventually, she stopped eating and wasted away, passing away in March 1871 at the age of 43. She was buried in Foster Cemetery near the small town of Poynor, Texas. Cynthia Anne's story, and that of the Parker family, is one of the most horrifying, heartbreaking, and underexplored in American history. However, not all their lives ended tragically. Cynthia's younger brother, John Richard Parker, also a Comanche captive, led a different life. Raised as a Comanche, John had a carefree upbringing, mastering archery and horseback riding. After 6 years with the Comanche, he was ransomed back to Texan authorities in 1842. Unlike his sister, John tried to reintegrate into Anglo-American society, but soon ran away to rejoin his Comanche warband. The Comanche were delighted with John's decision, viewing his return as a demonstration of loyalty. John likely participated in devastating raids deep into Mexican territory. On one raid, he contracted smallpox and was abandoned by his comrades to prevent the disease from spreading. Miraculously, John survived, thanks to a Mexican slave girl who nursed him back to health. The two fell in love, and after returning the girl to her family, John proposed to her. During the Civil War, John returned to the United States and joined the Confederacy, most likely serving as a bushwhacker. His Comanche skills were put to devastating use, and he survived the war, returning to Mexico a wealthy man. He purchased a ranch, raised a family, and lived to the age of 85, dying peacefully in 1915. John's life provided a remarkable silver lining to the violence and grief of the raid on Fort Parker, showing that the Comanche were not monsters, but a nomadic civilization shaped by centuries of deprivation and forced migration.